LaBuff, Tess O'Neill sat on the balcony of her sixth-floor apartment and looked out at the soft suburban sprawl of New Orleans, a blur of green trees and multicolored houses with the jewels of light just winking on. It was a time of day which made her nostalgic and gently melancholy, feelings she usually enjoyed, but not now. For once, she wished she were not alone with the evening. Gordon had canceled their date. No great disaster. He'd said they could have all day Sunday together, but the change of plans struck Tess as ominous, and she questioned him. Is something wrong? He hesitated. Maybe he was only reacting to the sharp note in her voice. Of course not. Jude made some plans, and it would spoil things if I went out. She sends her apologies. There was nothing odd in that. Jude was Gordon's wife, and also Tess's friend, a situation they were all comfortable with. But Jude was slightly scatterbrained, and when she confused dates, it was Tess who had to take second place. Usually, Tess did not mind. Now, she did. Tess didn't want to talk. She didn't want explanations. She wanted Gordon's body on hers, making her believe that nothing had changed. Nothing would ever change between them. They're in it together, him and his wife, and I'm left out in the cold. She looked up at the darkening sky, as blue as the nightmare's eyes, she thought, and shivered. She got up and went inside, suddenly feeling too vulnerable in the open air. She had never told Gordon about the nightmare. He admired her as a competent, sophisticated, independent woman. How could she talk to him about childhood fears? Worse, how could she tell him that this was one childhood fear which hadn't stayed in childhood but had come after her? As she turned to lock the sliding glass door behind her, Tess froze. The mare's long head was there, resting on the balcony rail as if on a stable door, the long mane waving slightly in the breeze, the bluish eye fixed commandingly on her. Tess stumbled backward, and the vision, broken, vanished. There was nothing outside that should not be. Nothing but sky and city and her own dark reflection in the glass. Snap out of it, O'Neill, she said aloud. Bad enough to dream the nightmare, but if she was going to start seeing it with her eyes open, she really needed help. For a moment, she thought of phoning Gordon. But what could she say? Not only would it go against the rules to phone him after he'd said they could not meet, but it would go against everything he knew and expected of her if she began babbling about a nightmare. She simply wanted his presence, the way as a child she had wanted her father to put his arms around her and tell her not to cry. But she was a grown woman now. She didn't need anyone else to tell her what was real and what was not. She knew that the best way to banish fears and depression was by working, not breeding, not brooding. She poured herself a Coke and settled at her desk with a stack of transcripts. She was a doctoral candidate in linguistics, working on a thesis, examining the differences in language use between men and women. It was a subject of which by now she was thoroughly sick. She wondered sometimes if she would ever be able to speak on self-consciously again, without monitoring her own speech patterns to edit out the stray feminine modifiers and apologies. Gordon arrived on Sunday with champagne, flowers, and a shopping bag full of gourmet treats for an indoor picnic. He gave off a glow of happiness and well-being which at once put Tess on the defensive, for his happiness had nothing to do with her. He kissed her and looked at her tenderly, so tenderly that her stomach turned over with dread. He was looking at her with affection and pity, she thought, not with desire. "What is it?" she asked sharply, pulling away from him. "What's happened?" He was surprised. "Nothing," he said. Then, "Nothing bad, I promise. But I'll tell you all about it. Why don't we have something to eat first? I couldn't eat with something hanging over me, wondering, I told you. It's nothing bad, nothing to worry about." He frowned. "Are you getting your period?" He turned away from her to open the champagne, and she stared at him, drinking in the details as if she might not see him again for a very long time. The curls at the back of his neck, the crisp black beard, his gentle, rather small hands, skilled at so many things. Gordon handed her a long-stemmed glass full of champagne, and after they had toasted one another and sipped, he said, "Jude's pregnant." She didn't say anything. He forced her head up off his chest and made her look at him. "Do you believe me?" He kissed her when she wouldn't reply. Then kissed her again more deeply, and then they were kissing passionately, and she was pulling him onto the floor, and they made love, their bodies making the promises they both wanted. After Gordon had left that night, the nightmare came again. Tess found herself standing beside the high, narrow bed she'd slept in as a child, facing the open window. The pale curtains billowed like sails, and outside, galloping place, like a rocking horse, moving and yet stationary, was the blue-eyed, cream-colored mare. With part of her mind, Tess knew that she could refuse this visit. She could turn her head and wrench her eyes open and find herself heart-pounding safe in her bed. Instead, she let herself go into the dream. She took a step forward. She felt alert and hypersensitive, as if it were the true state of waking. She was aware of her own body as she usually never was in life or in a dream, conscious of her nakedness as the breeze from the open window caressed it, and feeling the slight bounce of her breasts and the rough weave of the carpet beneath her feet as she walked towards the window. She clambered onto the windowsill, and with total confidence leaped out, knowing that the horse would catch her. She landed easily and securely on the mare's back, feeling the scratch and prickle of the horsehair on her inner thighs. Her arms went around the high, arched neck, and she pressed her face against it, breathing in the rough, salty, smoky scent of horseflesh. She felt the pull and play of muscle and bone beneath her and in her legs as the mare began to gallop. Tess looked down at the horse's legs, seeing how they braced and pounded against the air. She felt a slight shock then, for where there should have been a hoof, she saw instead 5 toes. Tess frowned and leaned further as she stared through the darkness, trying to see. But they were her own hooves, divided into 5 toes. They had always been so since the night of her creation. The thinly beaten gold of the lunula and its silken chain bounced against the solid muscle of her chest as she loped through the sky. Some unquestioned instinct took her to the right house. Above it, she caught a crosswind, and tucking her forelegs in close to her chest, glided spirally down until all 4 feet could be firmly planted on the earth. This was a single-story house she visited tonight. She turned her head, and at a glance the window swung open. The screen which had covered it a moment earlier now vanished. The mare took one delicate step closer, and put her head through the window into the bedroom. The bed with a man and woman sleeping in it was directly beneath the window. She breathed gently upon the woman's sleeping face, and then drew back her head and waited. The woman came after her as if drawn on a rope, leaning out the window and making soft, affectionate noises. The mare moved, as if uneasy, still backing, and then abruptly flirtatious, offered her back, an invitation to the woman to mount. The woman understood at once and did not hesitate. From the window ledge she slipped onto the mare's back in a smooth, fluid moment, as if she had done this every night of her life. Feeling her rider in place, legs clasped firmly on her sides, the mare leaped skyward with more speed than grace. She felt the woman gasp as she was flung forward, and felt the woman's hands knot in her mane. She was obviously an experienced rider, not one it would be easy to throw. But the mare did not wish to throw her, merely to give her a very rough ride. High over the sleeping city galloped the nightmare, rising at impossibly steep angles, shying at invisible barriers, and now and then tucking her legs beneath her to drop like a stone. The gasps and cries from her rider soon ceased. The woman, concentrating on clinging for her life, could have had no energy to spare for fear. Not until dawn did the nightmare return the woman, leaping through the bedroom window in defiance of logic, and throwing her onto the motionless safety of her bed, beside her still sleeping husband. When Tess woke a few hours later, she was stiff and sore. In the bathroom, as she waited for the shower to heat up, racking her sleepy brain for some memory of the night before, Tess caught a glimpse in the mirror of something on her back at waist level. She turned, presenting her back to the glass, and then craned her neck around, slowly against the stiffness, to look at her reflection. She stared at the bloodstains, stared and stared at the saddle of blood across her back. She washed it off, of course.